Hello and welcome to EDHREC's Upping the Average, where we take a commander's average deck list as compiled by the data on EDHREC and make some swaps to it to help take it from a good start to a great one. I really hope you trust me for this installment, but if you don't trust me, maybe you'll trust Trostani. Trostani, Selesnya's voice, is a 4-mana 2/5 who rides the line between life gain and token production. She can populate to duplicate our best token and also gains life equal to the toughness of each creature that finds its way into our conclave. Trostani's been around for a while, but Strixhaven's life gain theme has introduced a few new life gain centric cards to her toolkit, which have already begun to make their way into her average deck data. To see what else she's up to, let's take her average deck from the average deck feature and import it to the Architect deck building website. As always, the swaps we make must keep the total price of the deck either cost neutral or help lower the cost of the overall deck. I have to give my token of appreciation to Trostani. There's a lot to love here. Although she's not able to make use of any of the growing fractals from Strixhaven, because those are 0/0s naturally, she has already incorporated a handful of the life gain payoffs from that set and from Commander 21, from the life gain overrun creature to the mana producing elf that churns out tons of mana whenever we've gained a bunch of life. I think it's important for us to note also that over $100 of this deck list is wrapped up in just the Parallel Lives and the Anointed Procession enchantments too. Cough cough, wizards, please reprint cough cough. Also, can we talk about how good it is to pay a ton of life into the Phyrexian processor, then to create a token that's like a 30/30 and immediately gain that life back with Trostani while also being able to populate the crap out of it? Sweet stuff. I see a small number of improvements we can make here, but they are a little strange, so let's tackle them in the following ways. Mana production, some essentials and necessities, and some token tech. Let's start off by taking a look at that mana. Our first two sections are actually going to be a little bit small. We've just got a couple of changes that we've got to do to clean up before we get to the bigger stuff later on. Here, we're just going to be talking about the mana situation. So we've only got 34 lands here. That is too low. In fact, in my testing with this deck, it was the #1 hardest thing to overcome. Not hitting land drops and winding up with a hand full of 7 mana cards, absolute nightmare. I'd like our first changes to help add more land consistency to the deck. These are 2 cheap lands I'd like to add in first. Mosswort Bridge and Scavenger Grounds are a delight to play, especially because they're a horror for your opponents, particularly if they're anything like me. Please don't touch my graveyard, but this card is really good. That will bring our land count up to 36. With that said, I'm not just adding in some lands, I also want to tweak 1 or 2 that are still present here. Guild Gates, for example, are pretty blah. Believe it or not, I'm going to be swapping the Guild Gate for a Terramorphic Expanse. We have a small number of landfall token cards in the list, so on the off chance this synergy ever comes up, I'd really like us to be able to make some better use of it. I also don't think Fortified Village is particularly good compared to everything else we can do. If I could swap this for a Mirror Pool, I totally would, but the budget's gonna be really tight on this one, so instead I'll opt for Myriad Landscape. This can also trigger some landfall token stuff, but it's mostly able to grab us 2 forests or 2 plains, whichever one we need, and that can be really important to help us hit Trostani's double pip requirements, and to help us out in a deck whose curve is so top heavy. Turns out I'm still not done though. I'm also going to cut a few rogue cards for even more land consistency, because I'd like us having 36 lands, but I also kind of want to add in 2 Zendikar modal lands too. Balagad Recovery is just solid, and Emeria's Call I'm not usually a fan of, but Trostani needs land drops, and she's also one of the few commanders who can make the 2 angel tokens into a serious problem for our enemies. Of course, cards must be cut for these additions. 3 cards catch my eye here. Amara Tandris is far too clunky. She'll have to peace out. Then there's Llanowar Elves and Soul Warden. I want to be clear here that both of these are excellent cards, and the reason that I'm cutting them is because I don't feel this average list is doing them a good service. Soul Warden, for example, has tons of other Soul Sisters, but none of those appear in this list. Llanowar Elves similarly has dozens of other compatriots, but none of those are present here either. It makes these 2 just kinda stand out. If you want to build a Trostani deck with fast mana in mind, Llanowar is great, but it requires extra help, I think. And if you like Soul Sisters, which totally makes sense, especially if you're leaning into Trostani's life gain over her token production, then it'd be really wise to add in the other 4 or 5 Soul Sisters out there too. I feel either of those directions would deviate too far from our average here though, so as it stands right now, I feel like these cards are unsupported, and we'll let them go to make more room. So that was a short and sweet section 1, and it's time for section 2. Let's talk about some essentials. Again, this will be a small section. There are just a few things here and there that we've got to address that would be maybe unwise for our deck to leave out. Beast Within is present in this list, but Generous Gift isn't yet. I feel they really ought both be here. They're very diverse spells that we would like to utilize. The other thing I think we might need to spruce up just a smidge is our card advantage. I really don't want our deck to run out of steam. In pursuit of adding more card advantage though, I happen to spy that Desolation Twin. Remember how I said this deck's curve is high? Yeah, this is a great token to populate, but getting there is an issue sometimes. Can we swap this out for an Idol of Oblivion? It was just reprinted, and it's a draw engine that can also pump out that 10/10 token for an even cheaper cost if we're in need of something to populate. I really like this thing, and I suspect that Trostani will too. Another card recently reprinted is Return of the Wild Speaker. Fantastic card this. Pump up if we've got a wide army, or draw for anything that went tall. This is a key green draw spell. I'd also suggest Rishkars if it wasn't so expensive, but Return is just solid. I'm gonna add this one in by swapping out Cosmos Elixir. Cosmos feels to me more like it's a mono white card, not like it's a green white card. Yes, we like life gain, but green will draw us way more cards than this artifact will. Alright, that's all for section 2. We've polished up a few tiny spots, but now let's get to the meat of the episode. Let's actually talk tokens. Strixhaven has already had an influence on Trostani's average deck data, but Kaldheim seems to have gone under the radar for her so far. There are some cool token-related cards in Kaldheim though, so let's see if we can exchange some of the older tokeny cards for some new and improved versions. I'll start off by mentioning a few of the cards I want to add. Esseka's Chariot makes tokens and populates on attack. That's a surprisingly good rate. Battle for Bredegard I was unsure of at first, but this thing has actually kind of impressed me. Chapter 3 makes one more of each token we currently own. We get one more elf, one more soldier, one more worm, one more beast, one more angel. It requires finesse and timing, it's true. It's kind of a swingy card, but the potential ceiling on this thing for just 3 mana seems worth it to me. In fact, it reminds me a little bit of another card that we've got to get in here stat to help duplicate our tokens, Reese the Redeemed. This thing used to be $30, but ever since Double Masters reprinted him, he's been way more affordable. He can take over a board all on his own. That effect is brutal. Happy to add it here. Here's the sad part though, where we've got to cut a thing or 2 or 3 or 5. Since we had to make room for extra lands and basic essentials in sections 1 and 2, we'll actually have to cut even more than we really want to. So let's just grit our teeth and get to it. Wayfaring Temple is inconsistent, unfortunately. I prefer the Chariot since it came with tokens to actually duplicate, and getting those first tokens is really important to help Trostani get the ball rolling. Then Lathiel is a cool card, but I don't think we're in urgent need of +1/+1 counter synergy here. Our other life gain payoffs are a lot more potent than this one. Then there's a trio of sad cuts I'm gonna have to make here. Vitu-Ghazi Guildmage, Trostani Summoner, and Trostani Discordant are all sadly gonna kick it. This is again a nod to the high mana curve of this deck, which I really want us to try and bring down to make things as consistent as they can be. The average deck started with 20 cards at 5 mana or higher. We've just gotta cut that down, so the 7 mana Summoner doesn't quite make the cut here. The Guildmage is a good mana sink, but it also feels like a card poised to help us in the late game, which isn't the part of the game that this average deck needs the most help with. As for the Discordant, the buff is cool, but her tokens are among the lesser interesting ones that we could be making and duplicating. There are 2 other cards I want to officially add, but this part does require a kinda awkward acknowledgement of this deck's price structure. Not prize structure, price structure. This deck is nearly full to the brim of super budget cards at $1 or less, and then it is also full of cards that are like $20 or more. There's very, very little in between. There's like a clear line between super cheap and super not. So to change any cards in the deck, but to stay within the price restrictions of this series, going lower or remaining cost neutral, we'd have to cut really expensive cards. If you're on a budget, then that's no problem. Do not worry about obtaining $25 Mirari's Wakes or $60 Parallel Lives. But I'm also not finding expensive cards here that aren't necessarily pulling their weight either. I'm not going to go to that Ajani or that Helm of the Host and say that we're better off without them. You don't need them to play this deck, but cutting them does feel a little bit silly. So this is kind of my compromise. I'm cutting 2 cards whose price roughly evens out the additions we've made. Finale and Eladamri's Call. I think they're both pretty good, but compared to the other spendy cards in this list, these are just good when the others are great. More importantly, their abilities are more replicable than things like Helm of the Host or Aetherflux Reservoir or all of those other spendy cards. I simply think it's wiser to put your money into the other $1 cards we've added than it is to spend 7 on a tutor, since many slight improvements can produce better value than a single card that we might not even see in every game. If you don't want to stay beholden to the price restriction on this series, feel free to ignore these cuts. Don't worry, we'll have our honorable mentions for future budget or non-budget improvements soon. In any case, the final two cards that I want to get in here I think are just right up Trostani's alley. There's a Crested Sunmare here, which is hilarious because it can come down, Trostani will gain its life, and immediately will get a horse token at the end step, which Trostani can then populate. The fact that this is a creature means that Trostani makes the effect happen right away. So in that vein, I think the new Valkyrie Harbinger can do some similarly stellar stuff. Finally, this is my cheeky secret tech-ish addition. It's for the late game, but I just think it's absolutely hilarious. How about Nacatl Warpride, everyone? It attacks and makes a token copy of itself for each creature the defending player controls. So first of all, that's a whole lot of life gained from Trostani. The tokens only last one turn, so if they're doubled by a parallel lives, we don't get to keep the extras, but if we populate one of them, that token can stick around just fine, which means we'll be able to do this whole rigmarole all over again on a future turn. This is a way to make our entire army unblockable, gain bunches of life, and to populate a very, very nasty token indeed. Heck, can you imagine entering into combat with multiple versions of this token? Yeah, that's a lot of cats. Alright, let's round things out with some honorable mentions. If you're tighter on the budget, you'll save literally $200 if you ignore the Parallel Lives, the Anointed Procession, Bramble Sovereign, Mirari's Wake, Helm of the Host, and Aetherflux Reservoir. $200 saved, and while those cards may pack a punch, you can still totally stand in the ring without them. If you're looking for alternatives, here are some budget cards that I like. Angelic Accord is a bit like the Valkyrie from earlier, popping out an angel token for us. Remember that the early game is the most awkward hurdle for us. We want to get our mana situation in place, and then we want to find a good early token to start populating. Mouth to Feed seems innocent enough, but it is both token and draw spell whenever we feel we need them. Felidar Retreat makes tokens for us, and it can make attacking a total breeze. The current list is kinda low on board wipes too, so if enemies are outpacing us, I like Fumigate to fit right into our life gain theme, and Martial Coup, it ain't too shabby as a way to reset the board in our favor. Finally, did you know that Voice of Resurgence is like $2 or $3 nowadays? Talk about a token that we'll want to populate over and over and over again. Those are some lower budget recommendations, but what about folks on a higher budget? Well, the obvious card missing from this list is Doubling Season. If we're adding in Doubling Seasons, once we're at that level of tunedness, I don't know if we'll be needing the Arrasta of the Endless Web here. I also think that Luminarch Ascension would happily replace Speaker of the Heavens. That one is much easier to make a lot of angels than the other, and Luminarch Ascension can take over a game all on its own. Elder Gargaroth is also a terrific card to help get the token ball rolling, among other things. Selesnya Charm is what I think would be sacrificed to make room for the Elder. I like them both, but as modal effects go, Gargaroth is just so dang yummy! Naturally, white decks love Smothering Tithe too, especially when we have so many random token doublers lying around. Song of the World Soul probably doesn't survive the cut after that card gets added, I think. Also, we can't not talk about Aura Shards. I mean, it's a Selesnya deck. Aura Shards is amazing. I think Dawn of Hope is fine to let go of once we're at the point of adding in cards like Aura Shards. Finally, Azuri's Predation is hungry to get into this deck. That is a huge board swing, not to mention a ton of life. Doubling up the number of tokens that this can make is awesome too, though note that the extra tokens won't need to fight anything. If we're adding in a card like this, I'm gonna be giving up on a card like Camaraderie. There's just far too much savagery to care about Team Spirit, because our enemies are going down. Alright, that'll do it for me. Here's our final list. You can find it in the description below with the cuts in the maybe board. I hope this version of Trostani has not left you discordant, and if you have any other sage advice that you'd like to share with your fellow Conclave members, make sure you populate the comment section down below. Thanks so much for watching.